Hey guys, my name is Matthew, and this is my review of Holdout by Jeffrey Kluger. Here we go. Holdout is a science fiction novel that takes place in space. It starts off on a space station. It involves kind of the interactions between space and Earth and social media and politics and a lot of those different elements, and mostly a really enjoyable book. In this review, I'm going to be talking about some of my observations in the book. I'll start with some things that I liked the most. I'll go through the list to a couple things I didn't like as much, and at the end, I'll give you a recommendation for this book, who should consider buying it. To start with, I love a good sci-fi book, and this is a good sci-fi book. Sometimes you get into a science fiction book and you realize it's just a space opera and has nothing to do with science, and you're like, this is fun, but it's not science. This one is science. It's written really well, someone who clearly knows all about NASA and space stations, and the author just does a really good job with the science side of the science fiction novel. So if you like a good science fiction, if you're a good big Andy Weir fan or something like that, this book is going to scratch that itch for you. It's a good science fiction novel. Something else I really enjoyed about the book, it's got a couple strong female leads, and I think overall he did a good job of writing those female characters. That is sometimes tough for a male author to do, to write females well, and I think he did a decent job. I think overall their characters are strong, and it's cool to see them carry the story. Really, there's two female characters. I don't want to get too much into it because there's no mention of the second character, the second plot line in the kind of on the cover or whatever, so I don't want to spoil anything, but there's kind of two plot lines, two different female characters that are strong and related to each other, and it just does a good job, I think, of tying those characters together. That overall is pretty good. I'll say this is a book that the pacing was really slow on, and that sounds like a negative thing. I think it's a good thing, actually. I think people sometimes get in a rush, and this may be a book that you don't enjoy as much because the pacing is kind of slow, but I personally enjoyed this. It was good to kind of work my way through this book slowly and not feel like that he was rushing through the whole thing. Like the plot comes to you in pieces, the character development comes to you in pieces, and by the end of the book, I think he's done a pretty good job of going, yeah, actually this is all pretty holistically tied together, and I appreciated that. Similar, I already mentioned the two timelines. He actually does a good job with this. Sometimes two timelines gets very disjointed, like, oh, what time are we in? What's the situation? Which character's point of view are we from? That type of stuff. And I think he does a pretty good job with it. He ties these things together really well, the things that are going on Earth versus things in the space station, and I think he does, like I said, a good job with two timelines. It's tough to pull off, and I think he did pretty good. Lastly, and this is related to the last 2 points that I mentioned, I'll just say that this is a book that kind of begs to be finished. It's really interesting. I was fascinated throughout, and even though there are some shortcomings of the book, once you get into it, I would have a hard time saying, actually, I'm not going to finish this book. I was just interested, and even when I put the book down for a while, I came back to it because I was interested. I wanted to finish the book. So this is a book that begs to be finished, even when it slows down a little. Now, here are a couple things I didn't like as much about the book. The first one is where he really excels in the sciencey side of things. He really kind of de-accelerates, I guess, in the politics and law side of things. And so when some of those things come up, you really have to suspend your disbelief, I think, in order to be able to read the book well. So I struggled with some of those sections because it seems like that's just not his strength in writing as much as the space and the science and that kind of stuff was. So there's some info dump kind of sections. It slows down. It's a little bit boggy. And so there are some sections of that I was like, And then the second thing is, while I thought the main characters, he did a really good job of fleshing them out, I did not feel particularly attached to almost any side characters at all. And I'm not sure exactly what that was, but the character development was missing there for me, and I didn't enjoy pretty much any side characters. So that's something that I think he could have done a better job with, was fleshing out those characters. Like I said, for the main characters, the character development itself was slow. And so if you weren't willing to kind of stick out a bit of the book, you might find yourself halfway through and going, I don't know if I like either one of these characters either. And I think they do come along, but the side characters never really do. Before I give my recommendation for this book, I do just want to point you to the description below where I've got a link where you can purchase this book. It doesn't cost you any extra, but it does help out our channel a lot. So if you're thinking about buying it, I'd love it if you would use that link. Now, for my recommendation, I think this is, like I mentioned earlier, a science fiction book for people who love science fiction. If you don't love science fiction, the character and the plot don't drive this forward enough to say this is a must-buy, like Andy Weir's most recent book. But I do think that this book is good. It's really enjoyable. If you enjoy science fiction, if you like space, if you're willing to kind of sit through a little bit longer, a little bit more tedious of a book, this is a really good book. I really enjoyed it, and I think you will too. If you don't love science fiction though, it's probably not the book for you. You could find something that you would enjoy more, because this really does heavily rely on you enjoying science fiction. I will say just one final point. I don't mean that the science fiction is like tedious to get through that part of it. He wrote that part pretty seamlessly. It's actually the other stuff that is a little more tedious. Anyway, that is my review for Holdout. If you've enjoyed this review, please feel free to like and subscribe. Thanks again so much for watching, guys, and as always, stay safe out there.